Welcome back to Pure Health Talks, where we revisit some of the most powerful and practical science-based ideas for improving mental health, physical health, and overall performance. I'm Dr. Emma, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Jack. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Emma. I'm really glad to be here. I'm excited about today's conversation because we're diving into something fundamental, how we experience the world through perception.
Exactly. Before we get into the complexities of taste and the brain, let's start with a basic but important question. From a neuroscience perspective, how should people understand perception, and how is it different from something like sensation?
That's a great place to begin. You see, the world around us is made up of physical objects, things like a glass, a microphone, or even the air we breathe. These are real, tangible things, but the brain itself doesn't directly experience these objects. Instead, the brain is made up of neurons, and neurons only communicate through electrical signals. So the big question is, how does the brain take this rich physical reality and turn it into patterns of electrical activity that we can interpret and understand? That transformation from the external world into internal signals is what we call perception.
So perception is really about interpretation.
Exactly. But before perception happens, there's another step called detection. Detection is the very first stage. For example, imagine you put a sugar molecule on your tongue. Specialized cells in your taste buds detect that sugar. At this point, nothing has been experienced yet. You're not consciously aware of sweetness. It's just a chemical interaction.
So the body detects first, and then the brain makes sense of it.
Yes, that's right. Once those taste cells detect the sugar, they send signals to the brain. Then the brain processes those signals and transforms them into what we recognize as the perception of sweetness. That's when you actually experience the taste.
That's fascinating. So perception is really the brain's way of giving meaning to raw data.
Exactly. And understanding how the brain converts detection into perception has been one of the central questions in neuroscience. It's something researchers, including myself, have been deeply interested in for many years.
And I know you've studied several sensory systems. What made you focus specifically on taste?
Well, I wanted to study a system that was relatively simple, but still powerful enough to answer big questions about the brain. The taste system turned out to be perfect for that. At the time I began studying it, we knew surprisingly little about how taste worked at the molecular level, but what made it especially appealing was its simplicity. Unlike vision or hearing, which involve incredibly complex inputs, taste is built around just 5 basic categories.
Right, the classic 5 tastes.
Yes, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Umami is a Japanese word that roughly means delicious or savory, and it's often associated with amino acids, especially glutamate, which is found in foods like meat, cheese, and certain seasonings.
So even though our food experiences feel complex, they're actually built from just a few basic signals.
That's correct. And what's even more interesting is that each of these taste categories has a built-in meaning. We are essentially born with them. For example, sweet, umami, and low levels of salt are naturally appealing. They signal nutrients and energy, so our brains are wired to want them. On the other hand, bitter and sour tastes are often linked to harmful or spoiled substances, so they trigger avoidance.
So our preferences aren't just learned, they're partly hardwired.
Exactly. These taste responses are deeply rooted in our biology. They help guide our behavior, like what to choose to eat or avoid, often without us even realizing it.
That really shows how perception isn't just about sensing the world, it's about survival and decision-making.
Absolutely. Perception is not passive. It actively shapes how we interact with the world. From something as simple as tasting food to something as complex as making decisions, it all starts with how the brain interprets signals.
This has been such an insightful discussion. It really changes how you think about something as everyday as taste.
I agree. The more we understand these processes, the more we realize how incredible the brain truly is.
Well said. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the science of health and human performance. Let's take a closer look at one of the most fascinating taste responses, bitterness. It's something we all recognize instantly, but we rarely think about what's actually happening in our bodies when we taste something bitter.
Absolutely. Bitter taste is one of the easiest to observe, especially in animals and even in humans. The reaction is almost immediate and very physical. The moment a bitter substance touches the tongue, the body responds in a very specific sequence. First, you stop licking or consuming the substance, then your facial expression changes. You might frown or make an unhappy face. Your eyes can squint, and in stronger cases, you may even start gagging.
It's almost like the body is saying, "Stop immediately, this could be dangerous."
Exactly. And what's incredible is that this entire chain of reactions starts from something very small, a bitter molecule activating a single type of sensory cell on your tongue. From that tiny signal, the brain generates a full body response.
That really shows how powerful and efficient the brain is.
It truly is. This is the magic of the brain, how it can take a simple, specific sensory input and transform it into complex behaviors and actions that help protect us. And when you look at the broader picture, these 5 basic taste categories, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, are not random. They actually cover all the essential dietary needs of the body.
So each taste has a purpose?
Yes, very much so. Sweet taste helps ensure that we consume enough energy since it signals sugars and carbohydrates. Umami guides us toward protein-rich foods, which are essential for growth and repair. Salt helps maintain electrolyte balance, which is critical for nerve and muscle function. On the other hand, bitter taste acts as a warning system. Most naturally bitter substances in the wild are toxic or harmful, so our brain is wired to reject them. Sour taste often signals spoiled or overly fermented food, which could also be dangerous to consume.
So in a way, taste is like a built-in survival guide.
That's a great way to put it. These 5 basic taste qualities form a kind of biological palette that helps us navigate what is safe and beneficial to eat and what to avoid.
But when we eat food, the experience feels much richer than just 5 tastes. How does that work?
That's where the concept of flavor comes in. Taste is just one part of flavor. Flavor is the full sensory experience. It combines taste with smell, texture, temperature, and even visual appearance. For example, the same food can taste completely different depending on how it smells or how it feels in your mouth.
So flavor is like a multi-sensory experience, not just taste alone.
Exactly. But as scientists, we often need to simplify things to understand them better. So instead of studying complex mixtures, we break taste down into its basic components. We study sweet, bitter, sour, salty, and umami separately, almost like individual lines of information.
That reminds me of music in a way.
That's actually a perfect analogy. Think of each taste like a key on a piano. When you press one key, you get a single note, but when you combine multiple keys, you create chords and melodies. Similarly, in taste, activating one pathway produces a specific response. Combining multiple pathways creates the complex experience we call flavor.
That makes it much easier to visualize. Now, what about the biological side? How does this process actually start in the body?
It begins with structures called taste buds, which are distributed across different regions of the tongue. Each taste bud contains around 50 to 100 taste receptor cells. These cells are specialized, and they fall into 5 main types, each corresponding to the 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami.
So every taste bud can detect all 5 tastes?
For the most part, yes. Most taste buds contain a mix of all 5 types of receptor cells. However, there are some regional differences. For example, bitter-sensitive cells are more concentrated toward the back of the tongue. This actually has an important biological purpose.
Let me guess, it's a final safety check before swallowing?
Exactly. The back of the tongue acts as a last line of defense. If something toxic reaches that point, these bitter receptors can trigger a gag reflex, helping prevent you from swallowing something harmful.
That's an elegant safety mechanism.
It really is. Now, at the molecular level, everything starts with receptors. These are proteins located on the surface of taste receptor cells.
When a chemical, like sugar or a bitter compound, enters your mouth, it binds to its specific receptor. This interaction activates the cell, which then sends a signal to the brain.
And that signal eventually becomes the perception of taste.
Yes, that's the journey, from a simple molecule to a receptor, to a neural signal, and finally to a conscious experience.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as tasting food involves such a complex and beautifully coordinated system.
Absolutely. It's one of the best examples of how the brain turns basic sensory input into meaningful experiences that guide our behavior every single day.
So, once these taste molecules bind to their receptors on the tongue, what happens next inside the cell?
Great question. Once a molecule, say sugar or a bitter compound, interacts with its specific receptor, it triggers a cascade of biochemical events inside that taste receptor cell. These internal processes convert the chemical signal into an electrical signal. And that electrical signal essentially labels the experience. It tells the nervous system, this is sweet or this is bitter.
So, from that point, the brain starts to interpret what kind of taste it is.
Exactly. And what's especially interesting is how differently sweet and bitter are handled, because they represent almost complete opposites in terms of behavior. If we had to choose two taste experiences that are polar opposites, it would definitely be sweet and bitter. Sweet encourages consumption. It pulls you in. Bitter does the opposite. It pushes you away.
So their pathways must be very distinct as well.
Yes, they are. You can think of them like two keys on opposite ends of a piano keyboard. Press one key and you activate a specific note or pathway. Press another and you activate a completely different one. When sweet molecules activate sweet receptor cells across the tongue and oral cavity, those signals converge into a group of neurons that are specifically tuned for sweetness. The same thing happens with bitter, but along a separate pathway.
And where do these signals go after leaving the taste cells?
The first stop is a group of neurons located outside the brain, known as taste ganglia. These are clusters of nerve cells that innervate the tongue and oral cavity.
Where exactly are these ganglia located?
They're situated roughly around the region near the jaw and neck, close to where you'd find lymph nodes. There are two main ganglia that handle most of the taste input from the mouth.
So the signal travels from the tongue to these ganglia and then into the brain?
That's right. From the ganglia, the signal is sent to the brainstem, which acts as the main entry point of the body into the brain. Within the brainstem, there's a very specific and well-organized region that receives all taste-related signals. It's located in the upper or rostral part of the brainstem.
Is that area particularly specialized?
Very much so. It's a dense and highly organized region with different groups of neurons dedicated to processing incoming sensory information. From there, the signal continues to travel upward through several stages. At each stage, the signal is passed along from one set of neurons to another, what we might call sweet neurons passing information to other sweet neurons, and similarly for bitter.
So the identity of the taste is preserved all the way through?
Exactly. These are like labeled lines of information. The sweet pathway stays sweet, and the bitter pathway stays bitter, all the way until they reach the cortex.
And what happens when the signal finally reaches the cortex?
That's where meaning is truly assigned. In the taste cortex, the brain interprets the signal and allows you to consciously recognize it as sweet or bitter. Interestingly, different regions within the taste cortex are responsible for different taste qualities. So in a way, there's a kind of map, a topographic representation of taste inside the brain.
That's incredible. And how fast does this entire process take?
It's extremely fast. The nervous system operates on a timescale of milliseconds. From the moment a taste molecule interacts with your tongue to the moment you perceive it, the whole process happens in less than a second.
That quickly?
Yes. In fact, scientists can measure this by placing electrodes at different points along the pathway. When a taste stimulus is delivered, you can observe electrical activity moving through each stage almost instantly.
So by the time we're aware of the taste, the brain has already processed quite a complex chain of events.
Exactly. And once the signal reaches the cortex, it becomes part of your conscious experience.
Now, I'm curious about something related to development. We often see that children strongly prefer sweet foods, but tend to dislike bitter foods, like many vegetables. Yet, over time, many people learn to enjoy those foods. How much of this change is due to the brain adapting? Is there plasticity in these taste pathways?
That's a fascinating question, and it touches on both biology and experience. At a basic level, our preference for sweet and aversion to bitter are largely hardwired. Babies are naturally drawn to sweetness and tend to reject bitterness. It's a built-in survival mechanism. However, the brain is also highly plastic, meaning it can change with experience.
So, learning plays a role?
Absolutely. While the receptors on the tongue don't change dramatically, the way the brain interprets those signals can evolve over time. For example, a child might initially reject vegetables because of their bitter compounds, but with repeated exposure, social influence, and the understanding that these foods are beneficial, the brain can begin to associate them with positive outcomes.
So it's not that broccoli suddenly stops tasting bitter, it's that the brain starts to reinterpret that bitterness.
Exactly. The sensory input may remain the same, but the meaning assigned to it can shift. That's the power of learning and experience.
That really highlights how perception is not fixed. It's shaped by both biology and life experience.
Well said. It's a dynamic system, constantly balancing innate wiring with learned associations to guide our behavior in the most adaptive way possible.
So earlier, we talked about how our preference for sweet and aversion to bitter tastes are hardwired. But I want to clarify something. Does hardwired mean those preferences can never change?
That's a really important distinction. When we say hardwired, we simply mean that we are born with certain default preferences. For example, humans naturally like sweet tastes and tend to dislike bitter ones. But that doesn't mean these preferences are fixed forever. In fact, the taste system is highly adaptable. It can be shaped and modified by learning, experience, and repeated exposure.
So our brain can actually reprogram how we experience taste over time?
Exactly. A great example of this is coffee. If you think about it, coffee is naturally bitter, something we're biologically inclined to avoid. Yet millions of people around the world not only tolerate it, but actually love it.
That's true. Most people don't like coffee the first time they try it.
Right. What happens is that coffee becomes associated with a positive internal effect, mainly due to caffeine. Caffeine activates various neurotransmitter systems in the brain, leading to increased alertness, improved mood, and a sense of reward. Over time, the brain links the bitter taste of coffee with these positive effects. That negative signal, bitterness, gets reinterpreted as something desirable. This is a powerful example of how learning reshapes perception.
So the taste itself doesn't change, but the meaning we assign to it does.
Precisely, and that shows how flexible or malleable the taste system really is.
Now, what about this idea of desensitization? People often say they get used to certain tastes. What's actually happening there?
Desensitization is happening at multiple levels in the system. It starts right at the receptors, the taste cells on your tongue. When you repeatedly stimulate a receptor, like when you consume something very sweet over and over, the receptor becomes less responsive. It may undergo chemical changes that reduce its sensitivity, or in some cases, it may even be temporarily removed from the cell surface.
So the same amount of sugar might taste less sweet over time?
Exactly, and that's just the first level. Beyond the tongue, similar reductions in sensitivity can occur along the entire neural pathway, from the taste ganglia to the brainstem, then to higher regions like the thalamus and the cortex. At each stage, continuous stimulation can reduce the strength of the signal, so the system as a whole becomes less responsive.
That explains why people often need stronger flavors over time to get the same experience.
Yes, and it also highlights why the taste system has multiple processing stages. You might wonder if taste signals are labeled lines, why not just send them directly to the brain? The reason is that taste is critical for survival. Because of that, the system needs multiple points where it can be adjusted based on the body's needs, what we call internal state.
Can you give an example of how internal state changes taste perception?
A perfect example is salt. At low concentrations, salt tastes pleasant, and it's actually quite appealing. That's because our bodies need sodium to maintain electrolyte balance, which is essential for nerve signaling and muscle function. But at high concentrations, like seawater, salt becomes extremely unpleasant.
Yes, drinking ocean water is definitely not enjoyable.
Exactly, but here's where it gets interesting. If a person is severely salt-deprived, that same high concentration of salt can suddenly become very appealing.
So the perception flips completely?
It can, yes. Your tongue might still signal that the taste is intense or even unpleasant, but your brain overrides that signal because you know your body needs sodium. This is what we mean by modulation based on internal state. The brain adjusts perception to guide behavior in a way that supports survival.
That's remarkable. It's like the brain is constantly balancing sensory input with the body's needs.
Exactly. And this brings us to another fascinating layer of regulation, the connection between the gut and the brain.
Yes, I wanted to ask about that. How does the gut influence our taste perception and behavior, especially in ways we're not even aware of?
The gut plays a huge role, often beneath conscious awareness. After you eat something, your digestive system sends signals back to the brain through hormones and neural pathways. These signals can influence how rewarding a food feels, how full you become, and even whether you want to eat that food again in the future.
So the gut is kind of like a feedback system.
That's a great way to think about it. For example, if a particular food provides valuable nutrients, the gut can signal the brain to reinforce that behavior, making you more likely to seek out that food again. On the other hand, if something causes discomfort or harm, the gut can create negative associations, even if the taste itself seemed fine at first.
And all of this can happen without us consciously realizing it?
Yes, much of it operates below the level of awareness. It's a deeply integrated system designed to guide our choices in a way that supports health and survival.
That really changes how we think about eating. It's not just about taste, it's about a complex dialogue between the tongue, the brain, and the body.
Exactly. Taste is just the entry point. What follows is a sophisticated network of signals that shape our preferences, behaviors, and overall relationship with food.
So what we're really talking about here is a much bigger system than just taste, right? The brain isn't only processing what's happening on the tongue, it's constantly monitoring the entire body.
Exactly. The brain has to keep track of the state of all our organs, all the time. That's the only way it can maintain a stable and healthy internal environment. Every organ, the heart, lungs, gut, pancreas, needs to be coordinated so that the whole system works smoothly. And importantly, this isn't a one-way process. It's a two-way communication system.
So the brain is not just receiving information, it's also sending instructions back.
That's right. The brain is constantly monitoring signals coming from the body, and then it sends signals back to adjust how those organs function. This includes everything from controlling your heart rate and breathing patterns to regulating how your body processes nutrients like sugar and fat.
That makes me think of classical conditioning. Isn't there an example involving anticipation and food?
Yes, a classic one. In early experiments on associative learning, a scientist would ring a bell every time food was presented to a dog. After repeated pairings, the dog began to associate the sound of the bell with food. Eventually, just hearing the bell, even without food, would cause the dog to salivate. This is what we call an anticipatory response.
So the brain is predicting what's about to happen.
Exactly. Neurons in the brain form that association between the bell and food. Once that connection is established, those neurons can activate motor pathways that trigger salivation, preparing the body for digestion. But it gets even more interesting.
More than that?
Yes, in some cases, the body doesn't just prepare the mouth, it prepares the entire metabolic system. For example, animals can begin releasing insulin in response to the bell alone.
even without any food present?
Exactly. The brain has learned that food, and therefore sugar, is coming, so it sends signals all the way down to the pancreas, telling it to release insulin in advance. That way, the body is ready to process glucose the moment it arrives.
That's incredible. It means the brain is coordinating responses across the entire body based on expectation.
Yes, and this coordination relies heavily on a major communication pathway known as the vagus nerve.
That's the main connection between the brain and internal organs, right?
Exactly. The vagus nerve is a large bundle of nerve fibers that connects the brain to many organs throughout the body, including the heart, lungs, and digestive system. It carries information from the body up to the brain and also sends instructions from the brain back down to the organs.
So it's like a highway for information.
That's a perfect analogy. It's a two-way highway. Signals travel up to inform the brain about the state of the body, and then signals travel back down to adjust what the body should do next. For example, the brain might receive signals about how full the stomach is or how much glucose is in the bloodstream, and then respond by changing digestion, hormone release, or even hunger levels.
That makes me think of every organ.
Yes, essentially, every major organ is part of this communication network. The spleen, pancreas, gut, all of them are constantly being monitored and regulated. In fact, there's growing evidence that many conditions we traditionally think of as purely physical, like metabolic disorders, or even immune-related diseases, may actually have strong roots in brain function.
That's a big shift in perspective.
It is. For example, instead of thinking of obesity purely as a metabolic issue, some scientists now believe it may largely involve dysfunction in brain circuits that regulate hunger, reward, and energy balance.
So the brain is more like the conductor of an orchestra.
Exactly. The organs are the instruments, and the brain is coordinating everything to produce a balanced physiological performance.
Let's go a bit deeper into this gut-brain connection. How does the system actually organize all this information?
The vagus nerve is made up of thousands of individual fibers. Each of these fibers carries specific types of information.
You can think of them like individual channels. One group of fibers might be reporting on the state of your heart, another on your gut, another on nutrient levels, and so on.
So it's not just one signal, it's many signals happening at once. Exactly. And to make it simple, we can go back to the piano analogy. Each key is like a key on a piano. When a key is pressed, it produces a specific note. When many keys are pressed together, you get a complex piece of music. Similarly, the brain receives a combination of signals from all these fibers and integrates them into a coherent picture of the body's internal state.
And that's what allows the brain to respond so precisely.
Yes, that's the real magic of the gut-brain axis. It's not just one pathway, it's a highly detailed and organized communication system with thousands of lines of information working together. This complexity allows the brain to fine-tune everything, from digestion and metabolism to appetite and behavior, often without us even being aware of it.
It's amazing to realize how much is happening behind the scenes, shaping how we feel, what we crave, and how our bodies function.
Absolutely. Most of these processes are completely unconscious, yet they play a crucial role in guiding our everyday decisions and maintaining our health.
Let's explore something really fascinating: the connection between the gut, the brain, and our strong craving for sugar. Why is it that sugar feels almost irresistible for so many people?
That's a great question, and it gets right to the heart of some remarkable research. In fact, much of what we understand about this comes from experiments using animal models, where scientists studied how taste and internal signals interact. Let me walk you through a classic type of experiment.
I'm all ears.
First, imagine a normal mouse. If you give it two bottles, one with water and another with something sweet, like sugar or even an artificial sweetener, it will strongly prefer the sweet one. Even if the taste is slightly different, both sugar and artificial sweeteners activate the same sweet receptors on the tongue. So from the perspective of taste alone, both are sweet.
So the mouse chooses based on taste at first.
Exactly. It samples both, just a few licks, and then quickly decides, this one is better. Typically, it will drink far more from the sweet bottle than from the water.
That's the taste system driving behavior.
And that makes sense, since sweetness signals energy.
Right. Now here's where things get interesting. Scientists can genetically modify mice so that they completely lack sweet receptors. In other words, these mice cannot taste sweetness at all, whether it's sugar, artificial sweeteners, or anything else.
So to them, everything tastes like water?
Exactly. If you give these modified mice the same two bottles, one with sweet liquid and one with plain water, they initially show no preference. They drink equally from both because they literally cannot tell the difference.
That's expected so far.
Yes, but here's the surprising part. If you leave the mouse in that environment for about 48 hours and then come back, you'll see a dramatic change. Now, the mouse is drinking almost exclusively from the bottle that contains real sugar, not the artificial sweetener and not the water.
Wait, even though it still can't taste sweetness?
Exactly. That's the key point. The mouse has learned something, not through taste, but what happens after ingestion. During those 48 hours, its body detected that one of those liquids provided real energy. That signal came from the gut, not the tongue.
So the gut is teaching the brain what to prefer.
Precisely. This is the essence of the gut-brain axis. When sugar reaches the intestines, it activates specialized cells that can detect nutrients like glucose. These gut cells then send signals to the brain, essentially saying, this is valuable, this is what the body needs.
And how does that signal travel to the brain?
Through the vagus nerve, which we discussed earlier. The signal goes from the gut to the vagal ganglia, then up to the brainstem, and eventually influences higher brain regions involved in reward and decision-making.
So the brain is getting two types of information, one from the tongue and one from the gut.
Exactly. The tongue tells the brain, this tastes sweet, but the gut tells the brain something even more important. This provided energy. This is useful. And in many cases, that gut signal is even more powerful in shaping long-term preferences.
That explains why artificial sweeteners don't always satisfy cravings the same way real sugar does.
Yes, that's a perfect example. Artificial sweeteners activate the taste receptors, but they don't deliver actual energy to the body, so the gut doesn't send the same reinforcing signal. As a result, the brain doesn't build the same strong preference.
So our craving for sugar is not just about taste, it's about what happens after we consume it.
Exactly. Researchers have even identified specific groups of neurons in the brain that respond to this post-ingestive signal, basically neurons that become active when the gut detects real nutrients like sugar. These neurons receive direct input from the gut via the vagus nerve and play a key role in reinforcing behavior.
So the system is designed to make sure we repeat behaviors that provide real nourishment.
That's right. The brain wants to know not just what you tasted, but whether that food was successfully broken down into useful building blocks like glucose for energy or amino acids for repair. When that happens, the system reinforces the behavior, making you more likely to seek out that same food again.
It's like a feedback loop. Taste starts the process, but the gut confirms whether it was actually beneficial.
Exactly. And that's why our desire for sugar can feel so strong. It's not just about enjoying sweetness. It's about the body recognizing and rewarding a reliable source of energy.
That really changes how we think about cravings. They're not just psychological, they're deeply biological.
Absolutely. Cravings are the result of a sophisticated system designed to keep us alive, making sure we seek out what our bodies truly need, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
So what we're seeing is that the real reward signal doesn't just come from taste. It comes from what happens after nutrients like sugar and fat reach the gut and are absorbed.
Exactly. The key point is that the brain wants confirmation that what you consumed is actually useful for the body. It's not enough to just taste something sweet or fatty. The system is designed to check whether those nutrients are broken down and absorbed in the intestines. Once that happens, the gut sends a powerful signal back to the brain saying, "This is what we need. Remember this."
And that's what reinforces our preferences over time?
Yes, that reinforcement is crucial. It's what drives repeated behavior, what we often experience as craving or desire. Now, here's where things become especially interesting. The sensors in the gut that detect sugar are very specific. They recognize actual glucose molecules, not artificial sweeteners.
So, even if something tastes sweet, the gut can tell the difference?
Exactly. Artificial sweeteners activate the sweet receptors on the tongue, so they mimic the taste of sugar. But once they reach the gut, they fail to activate the same nutrient-sensing pathways. So the gut doesn't send that reinforcing, "this is valuable" signal back to the brain.
Which means they don't truly satisfy the craving?
That's right. You might experience the sweetness briefly, but because the gut-brain circuit isn't activated in the same way, the deeper craving for sugar often remains. This has important implications, especially when we think about diet and health.
Because we're living in a time where overconsumption is a major issue.
Exactly. Historically, malnutrition was mostly about not enough food, but today, in many parts of the world, malnutrition is actually driven by overnutrition, too much sugar, too much fat, and highly processed foods.
So the very systems that evolved to help us survive are now working against us?
In a way, yes. From an evolutionary perspective, sugar, fat, and amino acids are essential nutrients. They're the building blocks of life, and it makes perfect sense that the brain evolved dedicated circuits to ensure we recognize them, seek them out, and consume them.
So there are actually two systems working together?
Exactly. One is the taste system, which allows us to immediately recognize these nutrients and generate a quick emotional response, what we might call the liking system. That's the feeling of "this tastes amazing." But evolution didn't stop there. There's a second system, the gut-brain system, that ensures those nutrients actually reach the intestines, get absorbed, and support the body. That system drives what we call wanting, the motivation to seek out and consume those foods again.
So liking is about taste and wanting is about reinforcement.
Exactly. And together they form a powerful loop that shapes our eating behavior.
But modern foods seem to amplify this system in unnatural ways.
That's the problem. Highly processed foods are designed to strongly activate both liking and wanting pathways. They often contain high levels of sugar, fat, and flavor enhancers, which can overstimulate these circuits. In nature, it would be rare to find such concentrated combinations, but now they're everywhere.
So we're essentially hijacking our own biology.
That's a good way to put it. These foods co-opt the brain's reward systems, making us not only enjoy them, but also continuously crave them. You might think, "this tastes great, I want more," and then after eating it, your body reinforces that desire even further.
Which explains why it can feel so difficult to stop.
Exactly. And while the basic principle of calories, energy in versus energy out, still applies, it's not the whole story. The drive to eat, the pleasure we get from food, and the cravings we experience are all deeply rooted in brain and gut circuits.
So our eating behavior is not just about willpower, it's about biology.
Absolutely. And that biology can change over time depending on what and how we eat. The more we repeatedly activate certain pathways, the stronger they can become. That's why habits matter so much.
It sounds like understanding these circuits could help us make better choices.
That's the hope. By studying how these systems work, scientists are gaining insights into how we might improve human health, whether it's reducing cravings, managing diet, or addressing conditions like obesity.
But it's not a simple linear system, is it?
Not at all. It's tempting to think of it as a straightforward chain. A leads to B, B leads to C, but in reality, it's a highly complex network with many interacting components. Still, the principles we're uncovering are incredibly valuable.
Because they help us understand the challenges we're facing as a society.
Exactly. We're in a unique moment in human history where food is abundant, highly engineered, and constantly available, and that has created a situation where overnutrition is widespread. Understanding the brain and gut circuits behind our eating behavior is a crucial step towards addressing that challenge in a meaningful way.
It really puts things into perspective. What seems like a simple choice, what to eat, is actually influenced by a deeply complex biological system.
Absolutely. And the more we understand that system, the better equipped we'll be to work with it rather than against it.
Something that really stands out from this entire discussion is how different scientific fields often work in isolation. People studying metabolism, nutrition, and metabolic diseases are often trained very differently from neuroscientists.
That's absolutely true, and it's not that one field is right and the other is wrong, it's just that they've traditionally focused on different pieces of the puzzle. But what's becoming increasingly clear is that we can't fully understand metabolism, eating behavior, or even diseases like obesity without considering the brain and the nervous system.
So the brain isn't just involved, it's central to everything.
Exactly. The nervous system acts as the ultimate regulator, or you could even say the arbiter of these processes. It's constantly integrating signals from the body and making decisions about what should happen next. Whether it's hunger, cravings, energy balance, or even long-term health outcomes, the brain is playing a central role in coordinating all of it.
It really changes how we think about health and disease. Instead of seeing them as isolated issues in the body, we start to see them as part of a larger, integrated system.
That's right. And I think the future of science and medicine lies in bringing these fields together, neuroscience, metabolism, physiology, so we can better understand how they interact.
Before we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge your work. Your contributions over the years, from vision to taste, and now to this broader understanding of perception and behavior, have truly been groundbreaking.
Thank you, Emma. That really means a lot.
And I know I speak not just for myself, but for everyone listening when I say that it's been a privilege to learn from your research and insights. Your work has helped shape how we think about the brain, behavior, and even everyday experiences like eating.
I appreciate that very much. It's been an incredible journey, and there's still so much more to discover.
And thank you as well for taking the time to join us today and share your knowledge in such a clear and engaging way.
It's been a real pleasure. I've truly enjoyed this conversation.
We'd love to have you back again in the future to continue exploring these ideas.
I'd be happy to. That sounds great.
Wonderful. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on Pure Health Talks. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and thought-provoking.
Take care, everyone.